The president appointed Mike Pence to take charge of the response to the coronavirus and held a press conference to try to reassure Americans that ended up reassuring absolutely nobody. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. Nearly 3,000 people worldwide have died so far from the coronavirus, and now the CDC has confirmed the first case here in the U.S. of unknown origin. The stock market has plummeted this week on fears of a potential global pandemic, and officials here are warning that a wider spread in the U.S. is inevitable. Or, as the president put it during a press conference in India on Tuesday,
you may ask about the coronavirus, which is, very well under control in our country. We have very few people with it, and the people that have it are, in all cases, I have not heard anything other. Maybe there's something new, because for 2 days I haven't been seeing too much of that news, of very much news.
Man, that trip to India really screwed you up.
You know, the problem is I'm still on India time, which is 10 hours ahead, so a lot of the stuff that's happening in the States hasn't happened for me yet because I'm in the future.
Like 3 weeks ago, you were literally going around D.C. holding up newspapers to brag about your impeachment acquittal like an extra from Newsies. Did you not think to at least try reading one of them?
Look, we did it! Coronavirus!
Now, it turns out Trump's statement was only partially true. It turns out he was watching the news, but only because he was freaked out about the effect the virus was having on the stock market and thus his political fortunes.
Our reporting indicates that while he was in India, he was watching the stock market reaction very closely. He was very nervous and upset to see what was happening with the stock market. He seemed to be more aware of what was happening with the stock market than what was actually happening with developments with the virus.
Of course he was. That's the only thing Trump cares about, the stock market. For one thing, it's very easy to understand. There's no reading involved. All you have to do is look at that little arrow in the bottom corner of your TV and see whether it's red or green. In fact, whoever controls that thing could possibly drive Trump insane by flipping it back and forth really fast.
Oh, that's good. Oh, no, that's bad. Good. Bad. Good. Bad. Oh, no. Oh, no. Somebody make it stop.
There are only two reasons Trump only cares about the stock market. One, it mostly benefits the wealthy elite that he caters to. And two, he thinks it's crucial to his re-election chances. Politico reported that the White House is afraid the coronavirus could shape Trump's 2020 fortunes. That's why Trump has been spreading misinformation about the situation and seemingly trying to just will the problem away. For example, Trump keeps comparing coronavirus to the flu. Now, coronavirus has a fatality ratio about 20 times higher than the flu, and yet when an actual medical doctor, CNN's Sanjay Gupta, asked Trump about that difference at his press conference yesterday, Trump insisted that Gupta was wrong.
President, they talked about the flu and in comparison to the coronavirus. Flu has a fatality ratio of about 0.1%.
Correct.
This has a fatality ratio somewhere between 2 and 3%.
Well, we don't know exactly
the
what
numbers
it is.
so far.
And the flu is higher than that. The flu is much higher than that.
He's a doctor. Why do you think you know more than he does? Do you do this during your actual doctor's appointments? Mr. President, it looks like you have an undigested hamburger lodged in your stomach.
No, you're right. That's just my second heart.
Trump probably thinks he knows more about actual doctors because this guy was his actual doctor. Do you remember him? The guy who looks less like a doctor and more like he's hiding in the witness protection program? The guy whose fallback job is roadie for Hootie and the Blowfish? Trump probably did know more than this guy.
Bad news, man. Looks like you got your feet where your brain should be. No, I think you just have it upside down. Oh, yeah, I guess you're right, man. All right. Want some medicine?
Now, look, it's important to be cautious and not to panic, but it's also important not to ignore the advice of health professionals. Everyone should remain calm, hope for the best, but follow the advice of experts and be prepared. For example, public health officials have been warning this week that it's not a matter of if, but when the virus spreads here. A top CDC official, the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, said this week it was inevitable and that disruption to everyday life may be severe. So you can either believe that expert, a doctor and scientist who's received numerous awards and worked in public health for decades, or you can believe this expert.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
What? What are you talking about? It'll go away when it gets warmer? We're talking about a possible pandemic, not winter skin. Also, no one ever says "in theory" followed by the word "miraculously." That just proves how bad your theory is. In theory, she'll catch me having an affair, and it will miraculously make our marriage stronger. But this isn't just a story about Trump's incompetence, it's also a story about Trump's priorities. Because while he's been doling out trillions in tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy, he's also been proposing massive cuts to health agency spending. And when he was asked about that yesterday, he just shrugged it off and said he could rehire doctors whenever he wants.
Republicans have consistently called for enormous cuts to the CDC, the NIH, and the WHO. You've talked a lot today about how these professionals are excellent, how they're critical and necessary. Does this experience at all give you pause about those
No,
consistent
because
cuts?
we can get money and we can increase staff. We know all the people. We know all the good people. If we ever need them, we can get them very quickly. When we need them, we can get them back very quickly.
No, you can't. You can't just fire a bunch of doctors and then hire them back immediately when there's an emergency. You can't even get a hold of a doctor after 2:45 on a Friday. This situation should give Trump pause about his health cuts, but of course it won't, because nothing ever gives him pause. He literally doesn't even pause between words. That's why he's constantly sucking in air. By the way, if you see someone sniffing like that on the subway this week, move to the other end of the car. In fact, Trump's team is so deeply unprepared that even the Republican senators are getting frustrated with their lack of basic knowledge about the virus they're dealing with. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy grilled the acting Secretary of Homeland Security this week for some basic facts about the spread of the disease, like how many cases the department is expecting, and it only went downhill from there.
Is someone modeling that? Do you have any way of guessing?
Again, HHS, through their medical professionals,
Well, yes,
are...
sir, but you're head of Homeland Security,
Yes, sir.
and your job is to keep us safe.
Yes, sir.
Do you know today how many the experts are predicting? That we'll have?
We only know that, again, we anticipate those numbers to grow in the U.S.
But you can't tell us how many your models are anticipating.
No, Senator. Again, I would defer you to the Health and Human Services for that.
Okay. Don't you think you ought to check on that? As a secretary, I think you ought to know that answer.
I understand that.
How is the coronavirus transmitted?
Through a variety of ways. Obviously, human to human.
How is it transmitted?
A variety of different ways, Senator.
Tell me what they are, please.
Again, human to human.
Oh, is that how it's transmitted, from human to human? Sir, we believe coronavirus is either transmitted from human to human or by drinking a delicious Mexican beer. But we do think you can stop it by putting a lime in the neck. Seriously, how can you be the Secretary of Homeland Security and not know how many cases you're expecting or how the disease is transmitted? A better question would be, what do you know? We don't have a vaccine yet, but what we can do is airdrop calendars into every city in America so they can count the days until April when the disease will miraculously go away. In theory, in theory. So, obviously, none of this is reassuring. Now, when he was whipping up a panic about Ebola in 2014, Trump criticized then-President Obama's choice for a czar to lead the response, tweeting, "Obama just appointed an Ebola czar with zero experience in the medical area and zero experience in infectious disease control, a total joke." So to calm fears over the spread of coronavirus yesterday, Trump announced that he was taking his own advice and appointing a czar with in-depth medical experience.
I'm going to be announcing exactly right now that I'm going to be putting our Vice President, Mike Pence, in charge.
Mike Pence? What medical experience does Mike Pence have? At best, he looks like a CPR doll that won't let you do mouth-to-mouth on it. Although I guess it makes sense he's in charge of diseases now, because he always has an expression that looks like number 6 on the pain chart. Now, Trump explained his appointment by claiming Pence had handled healthcare in Indiana well, but in reality, he infamously oversaw a totally preventable HIV outbreak in his home state. Trump should have picked someone with relevant experience and a proven track record, but instead he picked a political yes man because he doesn't have anyone else left in his White House. I mean, Ben Carson is an actual doctor, but even he is less well known for his medical career at this point than he is for realizing mid-interview that he left his luggage in the car.
We just saw Mr. Trump here. I asked him, how did it go? And he said, great. And he said he learned a lot of things. What do you think he took away from today?
My luggage. Hold on.
Okay.
We have good news to report on the coronavirus. Oh, no! Oh, I left the vaccine in the car. This is exactly the kind of situation when you want someone competent in charge of the government who fills the civil service with apolitical experts and listens to them. Instead, we have a mentally incontinent game show host who's incapable of thinking about anything other than his own self-interest. In the meantime, we have to trust and listen to the hardworking, apolitical public health officials. And as for the Trump administration, just hope that it
Miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
This has been A Closer Look.